Welcome back everybody, my name is Tucker and today's video is a continuation of my NBA season preview series for the 2019-20 NBA season, and this one covers the Indiana Pacers. The Pacers finished with a 48-34 record last year before losing in the first round of the playoffs to the Boston Celtics in a season that initially showed a lot of promise but unfortunately fell apart with a major injury to Victor Oladipo. With his status for the beginning of this upcoming season uncertain at the moment, there are a lot of question marks surrounding this team, but even without considering the Oladipo injury situation, there is still a significant amount of talent on this roster that should keep it afloat towards the top 5 seeds in the Eastern Conference. But first, let's go ahead and talk about their offseason. The first addition is Malcolm Brogdon, who I talked about recently in the Bucks season preview. I think he's going to be really important for this team as a combo guard, as someone that can play make, as someone that can score. Again, specifically not knowing when Victor Oladipo is going to come back at the beginning of this upcoming season, or how well he's going to play, how quickly he's going to get back to form. It's really important to have a playmaker like Brogdon on the roster, considering some of their subtractions as well as how much they've relied on Oladipo since his emergence as an All-NBA player, as a playmaker and a scorer. So having someone that can not only take some of that away from him, but also can help carry the team in that category until he comes back or until he gets to form is extremely important for this team and was a worthwhile acquisition. Next up now is a player that quietly had a career year in Charlotte last season, and that is Jeremy Lamb. Now, certainly that Charlotte Hornets team did not have a ton of offense, and they were relying a lot on him as well as Kemba Walker to provide them scoring. So that's probably a reason why he had a career year from a per game standpoint, but the efficiency numbers are encouraging as well, and he should be a good playmaker scorer type for this team. Not as good as Brogdon as a playmaker, but someone that can shoot and can create plays on occasion. Isn't going to be an outstanding defender, which is why his value in terms of a salary on a per year basis isn't all that high, considering how talented of an offensive player he is at times. But this is a good addition for them, that someone isn't just a specialist shooter, but can also score for them as well in the backcourt. I like the addition of Jeremy Lamb for the Pacers. Next up now is an addition that's probably been talked about more than any other addition outside of the bigger names, obviously like Paul George and Kawhi and all that stuff, is TJ Warren. And the reason this has been talked about so much is because initially when the trade went down, where he went from Phoenix to Indiana, nobody really understood what the Suns were doing, and to this point, I still don't know what the Suns were doing. Warren had a good year last year, only played about half the season as a result of injuries, unfortunately, but from a per-game standpoint as well as from a shooting standpoint, which was the one thing that was holding him back from being a high-level wing scorer type player, he actually really improved his three-point percentage, and that made a big difference for him. Again, in relatively limited games, only playing about half the season, but he should be a good player for this team. Again, a scorer, someone that can shoot, and that's been kind of the theme of the offseason for the Pacers, was bringing in players that can help take a little bit of the offensive responsibility off of Victor Oladipo and can shoot and score a little bit in addition to being occasional playmakers, and not just relying so much on guys that can only shoot as specialists around Oladipo. So another really good addition and kind of a theme of them. And then last up is going to be TJ McConnell, who provides them some backcourt depth at the point guard spot. Not going to be hugely impactful, but someone that kind of replaces some of the subtractions that they did have. Should be good for them, like I said, as a playmaker, as a high energy player, and occasional defender as well. So good depth addition here for the Pacers. And I misspoke, by the way, that was not the last addition. There is one more, and it's their draft pick in the first round, Goga Bitadze. I'm going to go ahead and say that's the correct way to pronounce his name based off Basketball Reference here. He was their first round pick, should provide them good depth in the front court at the 5 spot, which surprisingly they do actually need a good amount of if you're going to be starting Sabonis and Turner together. So he should provide them good front court depth there as well. Moving on now to subtractions, and there are a couple of them on here that are significant for this team, as well as a few that were kind of weird situations in terms of subtractions. The first one is going to be Bojan Bogdanovic. I talked about him recently in the Utah Jazz season preview, a player that really stepped up for them specifically once Oladipo went down. He was good for them in general, but again, stepped up his game specifically in the playoffs without Oladipo. Is actually a surprisingly good defender, not necessarily someone you would think first as a good defender, but was really good on that end, as well as an occasional playmaker, shooter, and scorer. They're going to miss him. They've obviously brought in pieces like Brogdon and Lamb and Warren to counteract losing him in the offseason, but they're still definitely going to miss him on the wing. Next up is a player that they actually got mid-season that was good for them once Victor Oladipo went down as well, and that is Wes Matthews. Really stepped up his game for them, was a pretty good scorer for them, ended up turning that into an opportunity with the Milwaukee Bucks. This upcoming season, they're going to miss his shooting, his defending, and occasional playmaking as well, but again, they brought in some other additions to kind of counteract that. Next up is a loss in the front court, and it's Thaddeus Young, who moved on to a new deal with the Chicago Bulls. Someone that's just always provided so much energy for whatever team he's played for, provides some good skill as well. Hasn't necessarily, extended his range to the three-point line on a consistent basis, but scores well in the paint, can do some things in the mid-range, and is just kind of an unorthodox player in today's game that really fits well on a team like Indiana, potentially on a team like Chicago this upcoming season as well, so they're definitely going to miss him. Next up is a player that this fan base had high hopes for when he was signed last offseason, and that is Tyreke Evans. This time last year, Tyreke Evans was coming off of a season in Memphis where he really showed a lot of things from a per-game standpoint, looked really good, and turned that into a pretty significant one-year deal with the Pacers, and just did not look like the same player at all this past season, and is now actually suspended for 2 years from the NBA. So they're definitely going to miss him from the occasional playmaking, scoring kind of his game, but it just never really worked out the way that they thought it would last season. Second and last now in subtractions is their starting point guard for the last couple of years now, and that is Darren Collison, who kind of out of nowhere ended up retiring this offseason. So there's definitely a bit of a void there at the point guard spot, because I wouldn't really consider Malcolm Brogdon to be a true point guard, even though that might be kind of the role that he plays on occasion for this team. So definitely a void that they're going to need some guys to step up to fill at the point guard spot with Darren Collison gone, as well as the last addition, Corey Joseph, who moved on to the Sacramento Kings. Wasn't great last year, but provided them some good depth at the point guard spot. So again, that's a place that they're going to have some concerns early in the season if you're not considering Malcolm Brogdon as a true point guard, which I'm not. And now we move on to the depth chart. For starters, for me, I do have Brogdon at the 1, just so that the depth chart kind of works and makes sense. Then I've got Oladipo at the 2 once he does end up coming back, and then Warren, Sabonis, and Turner, and then off the bench, Holiday, Lamb, McDermott, Leaf, and Bitadze, the rookie. I'm so sorry if I'm mispronouncing his name, but this is a pretty good lineup. Kind of spreads the scoring out a little bit more with the starting group, because you do have Brogdon, you have Warren, you do have guys that can score. Not that Bogdanovic couldn't score for this team last year, but just spreads it out a little bit more amongst 3 players rather than relying so much on Oladipo. I do like a good amount of their depth, like having Lamb come off the bench in this situation is nice. McDermott as a shooter as well. Other than that, though, depth could be a question mark. They do have Aaron Holiday, who could end up stepping up for this team. I'll talk about him a little bit later. But then when you go to the front court, they've just got the rookie and TJ Leaf, even though obviously Turner and Sabonis are going to play a good amount of backup minutes at the 4 and 5 spot, because they're not going to play together the entire game, and they're going to kind of switch those things around. Still a bit of a concern from a depth standpoint for me. And then obviously the other one is just how Oladipo is when he comes back, or how long it takes him to come back. Lamb should be able to step up into that 2 spot and provide this team scoring, and then slide back into hopefully a 6-man role for this team once Oladipo does come back. But there's definitely some concerns here with this Pacers lineup. Moving on now to some players to watch. I've really only got one for this team, and it's going to be Aaron Holiday, because as I mentioned a few times in this video, Malcolm Brogdon, in my opinion, is not a true point guard, which leaves Aaron Holiday as a guy to potentially step up and fill that void, and then the Pacers could potentially go with a smaller starting group of Brogdon and Oladipo alongside Aaron Holiday, and then with their regular 4 and 5 in Sabonis and Turner. But that would require Holiday to really increase his production and look much better this year than he did last year. Showed some flashes, but wasn't in the rotation a ton. Is someone that can score and can play make, but needs to increase his consistency as well as his efficiency to potentially take on this starting point guard role. But it wouldn't surprise me at all if that's something that he ended up doing this coming season, because again, he is a talented player, just some other aspects of his game that he needs to shore up. So keep an eye on him for sure. Moving on now to expectations and predictions. For me, expectations, certainly this is going to be a playoff team in the Eastern Conference, at least on paper. In terms of prediction, I've got them between 43 and 47 wins, and it all kind of depends on the Oladipo injury thing. If he comes back relatively early on in the season and looks good and rounds into all-NBA caliber form by the end of the season, this could potentially be a dangerous playoff team with some of their additions. When you have those 4 players in Lamb, Brogdon, Oladipo, and Warren, in addition to Sabonis and Turner in the front court, that's a really, really good 6-man group, and then you add in some of their other bench players as well. So when rotations shorten up in the postseason, this could be a very interesting playoff team. But it all depends on Oladipo. It depends on his health, depends on his timetable once he comes back, because that will obviously affect their seeding. But I would definitely keep an eye on this team. Like, I'm not promising that they're going to end up making the second round of the Eastern Conference Finals or anything, but this is a team that always seems to surpass expectations, and I wouldn't be surprised if that happened again this upcoming season. But I do have them at a relatively lower win range than what they've been, simply because of the kind of how unsure I am about the Oladipo injury situation. But that is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you all very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.